Are you looking for some help with OET Reading Part C? If yes, you're in the right place. My name is Rachel. I'm a certified OET instructor, bringing you the advice and the practice you need to pass the OET. We are looking at some challenging questions, and as you can see on my screen, I have the text asbestosis and the question below, and this type of question is a suggestion or an inferencing question. I want you to pause the video, try to answer the question yourself, and then when you're ready, we're going to walk through some tips and tricks as we get to the answer. The first thing I want to talk with you about is the ability to read critically. Now, what that really means is thinking about not only the words and the sentences, but also the function of each sentence. And I'm going to write that on my screen. It's something we call text functions. It's this basic idea that every single sentence is providing us with information, and that information is not all the same. They have different purposes or different functions, as the word says. So let's give some examples here. One of the common types of functions is as simple as a definition. Usually this comes at the beginning of texts, and we can see that here. Asbestos is what? A naturally occurring mineral. So in that case there, we often expect the definition to come before the details, and we expect it to come early in the text when we're first introducing the topic. Okay, let's keep reading. That has been linked to human lung disease. We are seeing a connection between asbestos and human lung disease. How do we know it's a connection? Well, usually phrases that tell us, such as has been linked to. Other examples, we might see causes and effects. We'll talk about those in a few minutes, but this idea of item 1 has a connection to item 2. If we keep reading, you'll see that all of this next section is talking more about asbestos, the different properties, characteristics, even the usage of it. And so for this, we call this supporting details. And often the purpose of this is just to provide the reader with more information about the topic. Now, right after that, you'll notice the word because. So once we go through those next few sentences, because is one of those words to really pay attention to, because often it tells us what function the sentence is serving. Because of the widespread use of asbestos, comma, its fibers are ubiquitous in the environment. We'll talk about ubiquitous in the next question, but for now, what are we seeing here? Well, we are seeing a cause with the word because and an effect or result. Its fibers are ubiquitous in the environment. So what that means, if I were to write that out, is we are seeing a text function where two ideas are joined, but instead of being connected, they're actually, in this case, item 1 is leading to or causing item 2. So there's a little bit more than just a connection there. It's actually a one leading to the next. Now, if we look at the next sentence there, you're going to see the word however, and that's coming in the middle. However is often telling us there's a contrast between two separate phrases and ideas. And the phrases here that we're comparing are the time phrases, since 1975 and before this time. And then we are talking about since 1975, asbestosis no longer being in these insulation materials, but before this, they were in many homes. So we can see that naturally being compared. That, again, is another text function that you're likely to see in the OET, and you want to notice that, a comparison, because then it helps you when you get to the question. If it's asking for that, we know where to find it. Finally, the last sentence there. Look at these words. Indoor air may become contaminated with fibers released from building materials, especially if they are damaged or crumbling. When we see words like may, if, might, could, you should be thinking, this is actually, it's not a statement or fact, it is a possibility, or it could also be a suggestion, just depending on how it's phrased. How do we know that? Well, look at those may, if. These are conditions. These aren't certainties. So they suggest that the function is actually to present a possibility in that case. So these are only a few of the text functions, but they are ones that we commonly see in the OET. And the goal is, when you're reading, you're doing a very quick diagnosis of, okay, definition, supporting detail, I see a contrasting word, I see a cause and effect, I see a suggestion, and you're getting a more of a bigger picture of the text than just the words alone present. That being said, let's take a look here at our question. The writer suggests that the potential for harm from asbestos is increased by. Okay, so suggestion questions. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this is they are not a statement. And I'm going to put that all capitals with 3 exclamation points because I really want you to remember that. You see the word suggest. What often happens, we go to the facts, the details that are presented in the text, and we see those and we think that's the answer. No, unfortunately, we have to not only take the facts, we have to build them into a suggestion. So I'm going to show you how to do this. And if you haven't seen my previous videos where I talk about these type of questions, I would encourage you to do so because I go through some of the basics there of approaching this. Let me start here. We're going to call it fact A, and fact B leads to suggestion C. Okay, so fact A, fact B leads to suggestion C. How do we know it's 2? Well, usually we can tell from our question. Potential for harm from asbestos is increased by something. So what we're looking at here is there's sort of 2 pieces to this. One, we're going to find 2 facts, and then we're going to be able to conclude from that what the suggestion is. So let's start with the easiest thing, which is look at your question and find the fact that they're talking about already. The potential for harm from asbestos. Now go to your text and find anywhere it's talking about harm. Well, right in the first sentence, that has been linked to human lung disease. So let's write that explicitly so we can all see that here, and I'll erase that. Let's go back here. Fact A. Simply put, asbestos is linked to human lung disease. In other words, harm that could cause. That's a type of harm and it's specified there. That's often the case where we see potential for harm, general language, specific example of harm, human lung disease given in the text. So that's one strategy to keep in mind. All right, fact B. So where do we get the second fact from? Well, we see that it's linked. We're connecting it to this harm. Usually in the text, that means it's probably coming next to or close to that statement. So let's keep reading. It has been used in a huge number of products due to its high tensile strength. So we see here due to why it's used, but look at this. Fact number 2, it has been used in a huge number of products. So we could say asbestos is used widely or in a huge number of products. Okay, so here's the tricky part. We have 2 facts linked to human lung disease used widely in a huge number of products. Now the suggestion part comes where we make a logical conclusion or an inference. So if it's used widely in products, therefore, it is increasing the potential for harm. So we're connecting those 2 factual statements to make that overarching connection there. So something like, We could say something like the harm asbestos causes is connected to its widespread, or why don't we stick with the word we have, connected to its use in a huge number of products. It looks like my text got cut off there. Let me move us around a little bit so we can all see that. Huge number of products. And I'll move this down just so we can all see that. Products. Okay, it's cut off a little bit, but hopefully you can see that. So what's often the problem here is we go, well, but the text doesn't say that. But that's what they want you to do. They want you to take the facts and build that. So now if we go back to the question, what's missing? It's this question of what's there and what's needed. So the potential for harm from asbestos is increased by what? Well, we know it's connected to this. We see that presented. So which one is reflecting that second idea that's missing, the huge number of products? Well, C, the fact that it's used so extensively. Extensively, also, if we think of the vocabulary connection there, being used in a huge number of products. Sometimes if you're not confident, keep reading. You can see clues to just further support this. So for example, we see later the word widespread. We see the word or the phrase many homes. We see everything that's supporting and not contradicting that. So that's something else to check if you're just not 100% sure there. Okay, fact A, fact B leads to suggestion C. You take the pieces and you build that. And one of the biggest challenges is time management. It takes a bit of time to find the facts, but the idea here is you're building it faster and faster as you're reading with that practice. Okay, now we have a change in the method of manufacture. So be careful there. We do have it mentioned the fact that they were manufactured since 1975 and now they shouldn't contain asbestos. But be careful about the harm part, right? So changing it so that we're not using asbestos should actually decrease the harm. So that's wrong because of the fact that change is positive. B, the way it reacts with other substances. Well, here we see actually it says it does not undergo significant reactions with other chemicals. So that's just not factual in terms of how it's presented. Finally, its presence in recently constructed buildings. So just like A, we see they're talking about this, but what's the problem there? Well, they're actually in older buildings before 1975. The newer ones since 1975 should no longer contain asbestos. So that's a nice thing. Often you can go through the other options quickly and just eliminate them based on keywords that are wrong or looking that they're the correct looking at the incorrect opposite of what we're trying to find here. Okay, there's a lot to these questions. They're quite challenging, and it does take a while to recognize these patterns. If this is something you could benefit from more teaching and more practice, I would encourage you to join my upcoming OET reading course. And actually, I will have one full class dedicated to suggestions and inferencing. And that will be happening on November 13th. We'll be looking specifically at those type of questions, and I have more information in the description box and the link to register if you are interested there. Let's shift to the second type of question that I have for us, and that is building on what we've seen here. And just have to quickly erase some of this too. Okay, and here's the good news with the next question. We're actually still talking about the same paragraph, the same text, except we are changing the question. We're going to be focused on that word ubiquitous. So let's take a look together and we'll go into that now. Okay, here we go. Suggestions and lexical references. Lexical references. When you see that word that's bolded and underlined, they're asking you to make a connection between the word and the rest of the text. So that's your first clue. I want you to pause the video, read the text, answer the question, and then unpause it, and we'll talk through this here. Okay. These type of questions, the location in the text matters a lot. So be careful. Sometimes you'll find that there's statements that are in the text, but they're not related to the lexical reference question. That often leads to us getting the answer wrong. So the best place to always start close to the word or the phrase. And here we have, because of the widespread use of asbestos, its fibers are ubiquitous in the environment. Okay, so the first thing in that is to remember what we said, the text function, cause/effect or result. So this is so important because it's telling us it is not a contrast. Not a contrast. We're not seeing widespread use of asbestos being the opposite of ubiquitous. We're seeing that they're actually one leading to the next. So in terms of vocabulary, it should be more like a synonym than an antonym. Antonym meaning the opposite. That's your first clue often. If you don't have a contrast with a lexical reference, see if it is something that's connected to the same meaning. So what's important here is look at your first phrase, the widespread use of asbestos. That's causing the fibers to be ubiquitous in the environment. Sometimes it's a matter of keep reading and seeing if there's any other clues that give examples of what ubiquitous means. So for example, we have the building materials, insulation materials manufactured since 1975 should no longer contain asbestos. However, so contrast again, products made or stockpiled before this time remain in many houses. Look at that widespread use of asbestos. They're in many houses. We're seeing this theme repeated throughout. So just like when we are looking at vocabulary, we want to see, okay, are there ideas that are being repeated that could lead and help us find the answer? So the one challenge here is we see suggests. Sometimes this is about looking at the language of the options rather than the language of the texts. So look here for a clue. Can be found everywhere. May last a long time. So if I was looking at this, just the options alone, both A and B are suggestions, right? And very clearly suggestions because of the fact of the language. So pay attention to that as well. Sometimes the suggestion is actually in part of the answer option there. Okay, so if I was to ask you, we see the word widespread, we see the fact that it's in many homes. We also remember from before there was mention of it being in a lot of products, a huge number of products. Which of these is closely related to that in meaning? Can be found everywhere or may last for a long time. Well, when we're talking about widespread in many homes, right, it's frequency, it's commonness. And so this word everywhere, that's the one that's as closely connected as it can be to those words. Tricky, may last a long time. Okay, so again, we are seeing the fact that in the previous sentences, it's talking about it not evaporating, dissolving, burning, or undergoing significant changes. But the problem there is we have to connect ubiquitous. And if it's not connected to ubiquitous, we have a problem. So that's why that's wrong. It's a statement or it's sort of a idea in the text, but it's not related to our lexical reference. Same with this one, have an unchanging nature. Well, we can gather that or we can understand that from the previous sentences, but same problem. And again, if we go back to cause and effect, we could substitute this. Because of the widespread use of asbestos, its fibers can be found everywhere in the environment. So never forget that one of the things you can do after you choose your answer, substitute it back for the word and check, does it make sense? Does it logically line up with the cause and the effect here. And then are a natural substance. Be careful there. We do have the word naturally up here, and it is talking about it being, natural in its occurrence as well. That was the word I was looking for. So yes, that's a statement. That's a fact, but that's not related to the word ubiquitous. We don't have that connection there. So that's a problem when we are given these statements, but they're missing that connection. Lexical references are challenging. We can see here we have one vocabulary word that's advanced. A lot of the time, you may not know the word, and that's chosen intentionally to see if you can make those connections between the phrases and ideas. Other examples of lexical reference questions are expressions, so challenging expressions you may not know, where you're doing the same thing. You're trying to match the pieces together. You may also see where they have pronouns such as, what's a good one? They, or even that or it, you can also see, and those ones are more about finding a word or phrase to substitute from the text. There's a lot to say about lexical reference questions, and if these are ones you struggle with, I have an upcoming class on November 6th that is going to focus specifically on these type of questions. I've included the information for that and the registration link in the description box. And I would encourage you to join me if you're looking to practice and get some feedback on approaching these questions with a strong strategy. They take time, they take experience, and once you start to make those connections, these questions become a lot easier. Finally, I have a free OET speaking workshop on October 3rd, and that link is also in the description box. It's a great opportunity to meet you face to face, to have some practice, some feedback, and also to learn from others' experiences as well with the OET. If you have not already, make sure to subscribe. The next video will be looking at more critical reading analysis with some other types of questions. Comment down below which of these suggestions, lexical references, both, do you find most challenging? And if you learned something today, make sure to like this video as well. I'll see you in the next one.